Most people only respect a man after they learn how much money he has. But sometimes, the richest thing about a man is the way he treats a stranger when nobody is watching. Rain slammed against the empty Texas highway just after midnight, turning the neon lights of Miller's Gas and Diner into blurred streaks of red and gold across the wet pavement. A dark blue 1967 Mustang sat crooked near pump number 4, its hood slightly open while steam drifted into the cold night air. Inside the car, Claire Whitmore gripped the steering wheel with trembling fingers, her mascara faded from hours of stress and rain. 3 men wearing expensive suits stood beneath the diner awning nearby, sipping coffee and laughing loud enough for everyone to hear. "That thing belongs in a museum," one of them muttered. "Lady probably doesn't even know how to open the hood." Another chuckled. "Doesn't matter. Women driving cars like that always have someone rich coming to rescue them." Then headlights cut through the rain. An old white tow truck rolled slowly into the station parking lot with rust around the wheel wells and a cracked company logo that read Carter Auto Repair. Ethan Carter stepped out wearing a faded brown work jacket stained with grease along the sleeves. He looked tired. Not weak. Just tired in the way honest men often look after carrying too much life on their backs for too long. One of the businessmen smirked the second he saw him. "Well, look at that," he said under his breath. Guess rescue finally showed up. Ethan ignored them completely. He grabbed a flashlight from his truck and walked toward the Mustang, while rain soaked through his jacket almost instantly. Claire stepped out of the car carefully, wrapping her arms against the cold. Even under the harsh gas station lights, she carried herself with a quiet kind of elegance. But there was sadness in her eyes, too. The kind money never fixes. "Car won't turn over?" Ethan asked calmly. Claire nodded. Started making a clicking sound about 10 miles back. Ethan crouched beside the Mustang, listening carefully as she tried the ignition again. Click, click, silence. The businessmen kept watching from the diner window, now amused like they were witnessing some small-town comedy show. "Probably too much car for him," one of them laughed. Ethan said nothing. He simply opened the hood and let the flashlight beam drift slowly across the engine. Rain tapped softly against the metal while steam curled around his hands. For a few seconds, the whole world seemed to quiet down except for the storm and the low hum of trucks passing on the highway. Then Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out a small wrench, tightened a loose terminal connection, and nodded once. "Try it now." Claire turned the key. The Mustang roared to life instantly, its deep engine rumble echoing across the station. The businessman stopped laughing. Ethan stepped back from the hood, rain dripping from his hair onto the concrete. "Should get you another 100 miles at least," he said. Claire stared at him for a moment longer than expected. Not because he fixed the car, but because he never once tried to impress her while doing it. And somewhere behind her exhausted eyes, something quietly shifted the moment she realized the mechanic standing in the rain treated her with more dignity than every rich man she'd met all year. The rain had softened by the time Ethan Carter pulled his tow truck into the cracked driveway beside his garage on the edge of town. A crooked wooden sign reading Carter Auto Repair swung gently in the cold wind, while the old building sat quiet beneath a flickering security light. Most businesses along Route 8 had shut down years ago after the factories moved overseas, but Ethan kept the garage alive the same way some men keep old churches alive. Not for money, for memory. He killed the engine and sat there for a moment with both hands resting on the steering wheel. The silence after a long night always felt heavier somehow. Inside the passenger seat sat a small pink lunchbox with faded cartoon stickers peeling from the corners. Lily had forgotten it that morning before school. Ethan picked it up carefully before stepping out into the damp night air. The scent of rain, gasoline, and cold asphalt followed him as he walked toward the small house behind the garage. One porch light glowed softly. Through the darkness, home was not much to look at. Peeling white paint, rust along the gutters, a porch swing that creaked whenever the wind picked up. But inside that house lived the only thing Ethan truly cared about protecting. He opened the front door quietly. A tiny pair of sneakers sat near the entrance beside a stack of second-grade homework papers. The television was still glowing silently in the corner, while Lily slept curled up on the couch beneath a blanket almost too big for her small frame. Ethan smiled faintly the second he saw her. The kind of smile tired fathers save only for their children. He bent down carefully and brushed loose hair from her forehead. You waited up again, he whispered softly. Lily opened one sleepy eye. Did you fix somebody's car? Ethan nodded once. Just a Mustang. Her eyes widened immediately. A real one. A real one. She smiled sleepily before resting her head against his arm. Mom liked Mustangs, she murmured. The room grew quiet after that. Ethan swallowed hard, but kept his voice calm. Yeah, he said gently. She did. He carried Lily upstairs to her room, while thunder rolled softly in the distance beyond the windows. After tucking her into bed, Ethan noticed the strap on her lunchbox had snapped completely. Most people would have thrown it away. Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table close to 1 in the morning, carefully stitching the worn strap back together with fishing line from an old toolbox drawer. The kitchen light buzzed softly overhead while coffee brewed in the background. Outside, headlights occasionally drifted along the highway beyond the trees. Simple sounds. Quiet sounds. The kind lonely people become friends with. Ethan finally leaned back in his chair after fixing the strap. His rough hands were covered in grease stains that never fully washed away anymore. Men at diners and gas stations saw those hands and assumed failure. But those same hands had built engines from scrap metal, repaired tractors for struggling farmers without charging a dime, and held a frightened little girl together after her mother passed away 3 years earlier. Ethan stared out the kitchen window toward the dark garage. Beyond the rain, he thought about the woman with the Mustang again, about the sadness in her eyes, about the way she thanked him like kindness was something rare. Then he quietly shook his head and stood up to turn off the kitchen light, never imagining that meeting her beside a broken car was about to change every part of his life. The next morning arrived cold and gray over the small Texas town, with low clouds hanging above Route 8, while Ethan Carter rolled open the garage doors just after 7. The familiar smell of motor oil and old metal filled the air as country music played softly from a dusty radio near the workbench. Ethan moved through the garage with the quiet rhythm of a man who had done the same honest work every day for years. He checked inventory, organized tools, started coffee in the tiny office near the back wall. Outside, trucks passed along the highway while puddles from the storm reflected the pale morning light. "Dad, you forgot your lunch again," Lily called as she stepped into the garage wearing a backpack almost too big for her shoulders. Ethan looked up from beneath the hood of an old pickup truck and smiled faintly. "That is because somebody distracted me asking for pancakes before school." Lily grinned proudly. They were heart-shaped pancakes. "That is true," Ethan admitted. She walked over and placed the paper bag beside his toolbox before lowering her voice dramatically. "Do you think the Mustang lady made it home?" Ethan wiped grease from his hands with a rag. "Probably." "Do rich people always drive cool cars?" she asked innocently. Ethan chuckled softly. "Not always." Before Lily could answer, the sound of a low engine rolled slowly into the garage parking lot. Both of them turned toward the entrance. The dark blue Mustang eased carefully across the cracked pavement before stopping beside the open bay door. For a second, Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Claire Whitmore stepped out wearing jeans, boots, and a cream-colored sweater beneath a long camel coat. No expensive jewelry, no sunglasses, no driver, just 2 coffee cups in her hands and exhaustion still lingering quietly behind her eyes. Lily whispered dramatically. Mustang lady came back. Ethan gave her a look. Inside voice. Claire smiled for the first time since arriving in town. It was small, careful, but real. "I figured I still owed you coffee after last night," she said while handing Ethan one of the cups. "You did not have to do that." "Maybe I wanted to." The garage suddenly felt strangely quiet after that. Rainwater still dripped softly from the roof outside, while steam rose from the coffee between them. Ethan nodded toward the Mustang. "Everything running all right?" Claire leaned lightly against the car. "Mostly, but the steering still feels loose above 60 miles per hour." Ethan walked slowly around the vehicle, inspecting it with calm focus. "You drove it all the way here anyway. I trust the mechanic now." The words landed softly between them. Honest. Unexpected. Ethan opened the driver's side door and checked beneath the dashboard while Claire watched him carefully. Most men she met spent the first 5 minutes trying to impress her. Ethan never seemed interested in proving anything at all. Lily quietly walked closer to the Mustang, staring wide-eyed at the chrome details. "My dad says old cars matter because people used to build things with pride," she said. Claire looked at her gently. "Your dad sounds smart." Lily shrugged. He just does not talk much. Ethan shook his head while tightening a bolt beneath the steering column. I can hear both of you. Lily giggled. Claire laughed softly under her breath, and for a brief second, the heaviness she carried seemed lighter somehow. Then her eyes drifted across the garage walls covered in faded photographs, old racing signs, and family memories frozen in dusty frames. One picture showed a younger Ethan standing beside his late wife in front of the same garage years earlier. Claire studied the photo quietly before looking back at Ethan, and something in her expression changed the moment she realized this man had already lost enough in life to become bitter, yet somehow still chose kindness anyway. By noon, the clouds had finally broken apart above the town, leaving streaks of pale sunlight across the highway while Ethan Carter stood beside the Mustang with both hands resting against the open hood. Claire sat quietly on a stool nearby, holding another cup of coffee, while Lily colored pictures at the office desk in the corner. The garage smelled like warm engine oil and fresh rain drying off old pavement. The steering linkage is worn out, Ethan explained calmly while tightening a bolt beneath the engine. Not dangerous yet, but if you keep driving at long distances, eventually it will become a problem. Claire nodded slowly. Can you fix it? Yeah. Ethan glanced toward her. Might take a couple days if I rebuild the original parts instead of replacing everything. I would rather keep the original. Ethan gave a faint approving nod. That car means something to you. Claire looked toward the Mustang for a long moment before answering. It belonged to my father. Her voice softened slightly after that. He bought it when he was 22 years old. Ethan closed the hood carefully. He kept good taste. Claire smiled faintly, but sadness lingered behind it. He used to say old cars were honest. You always knew what was broken because everything was right there in front of you. Ethan leaned against the workbench quietly. People are usually harder to figure out. For a second, their eyes met in the middle of the garage, while the old radio played low country music somewhere near the back wall. It felt strangely peaceful. Too peaceful for two people carrying that much loneliness. Then the calm broke with the sound of tires crunching across gravel outside. A black luxury SUV slowly pulled into the lot beside the Mustang. Ethan immediately noticed the vehicle cost more than his house. The driver stepped out wearing a dark suit, while another man remained behind the wheel speaking into a headset. Claire's entire posture changed the moment she saw them. Not fear exactly. More like exhaustion. The suited man walked quickly toward her. Miss Whitmore, we have been trying to reach you since last night. Ethan looked down slightly at the name. Whitmore. Something about it sounded familiar. Claire stood up slowly. I told everyone I needed space for 2 days. The board meeting was moved up to tomorrow morning in Dallas. The man lowered his voice. The investors are already nervous. Ethan quietly stepped back toward the toolbox, giving her privacy without making a scene. That alone seemed to surprise Claire more than anything. Most people became curious the second money entered a conversation. Ethan acted like it changed absolutely nothing. The suited man finally noticed the garage around him, and his expression shifted subtly. He glanced at Ethan's stained work jacket, the aging equipment, the rust near the garage doors. Your hotel could have arranged a better mechanic, he muttered carefully. Ethan kept working without reacting. Claire's eyes hardened immediately. This mechanic fixed what 3 dealerships failed to diagnose. The man fell silent. Lily looked up from her coloring book and whispered quietly toward Ethan. He talks like the people at fancy restaurants on television. Ethan hid a smile behind the rag in his hand. Outside, sunlight reflected across the polished black SUV, while expensive watches and pressed suits suddenly felt very far away from the warmth inside the small garage. Claire noticed it too. The silence here felt honest. No cameras, no shareholders, no pretending, just the sound of tools against metal and a father teaching his daughter kindness without ever saying the word out loud. Then the suited man handed Claire a leather folder, by mistake partially opening it in front of Ethan. For only a second, Ethan saw the gold-embossed words Whitmore Industries beside financial documents filled with numbers so large they barely looked real. He immediately looked away. But somewhere deep inside him, an uncomfortable distance quietly began to grow. The town of Red Hollow was small enough that people noticed unfamiliar cars before they noticed the weather, and by late afternoon nearly everyone along Main Street had already heard about the elegant woman spending time at Ethan Carter's garage. Inside Rosie's diner, Coffee cups clinked softly, while waitresses moved between booths carrying plates of fried catfish and mashed potatoes. Two older men near the counter leaned closer together the second Ethan walked in after picking Lily up from school. That mechanic finally found himself a rich tourist, one muttered quietly. Probably thinks his luck changed overnight. The other answered with a laugh. Ethan heard every word. He simply guided Lily toward a booth near the window without reacting. Dignity often sounds like silence when a good man is tired of explaining himself. Lily climbed onto the seat beside him while drawing shapes into the fogged glass. "Dad?" she asked softly. "Yeah. Why do grown-ups say mean things when they do not know somebody?" Ethan glanced toward the counter where the whispers stopped the second people realized he could hear them. He looked back at his daughter calmly. Some people get uncomfortable when they see kindness they do not understand. Lily considered that carefully while the waitress brought sweet tea to the table. Outside, the late afternoon sun reflected across parked trucks and dusty storefront windows. Small towns had a strange way of loving people and judging them at the exact same time. The diner door opened again with a soft bell above it. Conversation around the room shifted almost immediately. Claire Whitmore stepped inside wearing a long beige coat while strands of blonde hair moved softly in the warm air from the kitchen vents. Every head turned. Men straightened in their seats. Women exchanged quick glances over coffee mugs. Claire noticed Ethan instantly and walked toward the booth carrying a stack of folders pressed against her chest. "I hope I am not interrupting," she said gently. Ethan stood halfway out of his seat out of habit more than formality. "Not at all." Claire smiled toward Lily. "How was school?" "I got an A on my spelling test," Lily announced proudly. "That is impressive. Dad helped me study." Claire looked at Ethan briefly after that. "I am not surprised." The waitress arrived awkwardly beside the table. "What can I get for you, ma'am?" Claire barely glanced at the menu. "Just coffee, thank you." One businessman sitting near the counter quietly whispered something under his breath that caused another table to laugh softly. Claire heard it. Ethan heard it too. Women like her do not stay in towns like this long. Ethan calmly folded his napkin beside his plate. "People around here talk too much." Claire looked toward the window instead of the room. People everywhere talk too much. Silence settled gently between them after that while the diner lights cast warm reflections against the glass. Then Claire carefully placed the folders on the table and opened one. Inside were old photographs of the Mustang from decades earlier. A younger man stood beside the car, smiling proudly outside a factory building. "My father rebuilt this car himself when he was 23, she said quietly. "He worked every weekend on it before the company became successful." Ethan studied the photograph carefully. "He looks proud of honest work." Claire nodded slowly, but her eyes darkened slightly. He was. Before the money changed everything around him. The room around them faded into distant noise while Ethan turned another photograph carefully between grease-stained fingers. There was pain hidden beneath Claire's calm voice now. Real pain. Not the kind created by poverty. The kind created by losing yourself while surrounded by wealth. And for the first time since she arrived in Red Hollow, Claire looked at Ethan Carter not like a mechanic, but like someone safe enough to tell the truth to. 3 days later, the Mustang sat inside Ethan Carter's garage with the hood open and half the engine carefully dismantled across a rolling steel table. Warm evening sunlight poured through the dusty windows while classic country music echoed softly against the concrete walls. Claire Whitmore stood beside Ethan wearing faded jeans and work gloves now lightly stained with grease. The expensive woman from the black SUV looked strangely comfortable in the old garage. "Hold the flashlight higher," Ethan said while reaching deeper into the engine bay. "Like this. Little more left." Claire adjusted the beam carefully. "You are very particular." Ethan smirked faintly without looking up. "Machines punish lazy people." Claire laughed softly under her breath. "That sounds like something my father used to say." Nearby, Lily sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing bolts by size with complete seriousness. "Dad says every piece matters," she announced. Proudly. "Because if you lose one bolt, you spend 3 hours looking for it." Ethan pointed toward her without lifting his head. "Smartest person in the garage." Lily grinned triumphantly while Claire watched the two of them quietly. There was something painfully beautiful about ordinary happiness when you had spent years surrounded by people pretending to be happy. Her phone buzzed again inside her coat pocket. Claire ignored it for the fourth time that hour. Ethan noticed, but said nothing. He simply continued working while the warm smell of oil and old leather filled the garage air. Outside, pickup trucks rolled slowly along Route 8, while evening settled across the small town. Then the garage door opened, and a silver pickup pulled inside. A local farmer named Walter stepped out looking anxious. "Ethan, I hate asking this," he said immediately. "My truck transmission gave out again, and I cannot haul feed tomorrow unless I get it running tonight." Ethan wiped his hands with a rag. "Bring it into Bay 2. Walter shifted awkwardly. "I do not have enough money until next Friday." Ethan barely paused. "We will figure it out." Claire looked up from the toolbox. "You are still going to fix it?" Ethan shrugged lightly like the answer was obvious. His cattle still need feeding tomorrow. Walter lowered his eyes in embarrassment. "I appreciate it." "No problem." Claire watched the entire exchange silently while Ethan rolled the transmission jack across the floor without hesitation. No performance. No speeches. No expectation of praise. Just kindness moving quietly through a tired man like second nature. An hour later, grease covered Ethan's forearms while sweat darkened the collar of his work shirt. Walter tried apologizing twice more about the payment. Ethan refused to let him finish either time. Claire finally stepped outside for air while twilight painted the Texas sky deep orange and purple beyond the highway. She stood beside the Mustang staring toward the horizon when Lily walked out, holding 2 bottled sodas. "Dad says you forget to eat when you are stressed," Lily said matter-of-factly. Claire blinked in surprise. "He said that?" Lily nodded. "He notices stuff." Claire looked back through the garage window where Ethan quietly worked beneath the truck lift while helping a man who could not pay him. Her expression softened slowly. In her world, people measured human value through stock prices, contracts, and influence. But here, inside a fading garage beside an old highway, a struggling mechanic with worn hands carried more integrity than most billionaires she had ever known. Then Lily looked up innocently and asked the one question nobody in Claire's world had dared ask in years. "Are you sad all the time, too?" Claire stood completely still after that. The evening wind moved gently through the trees while distant thunder rolled far beyond town. And for the first time in a very long time, Claire Whitmore did not know how to hide the truth behind her smile. Friday night brought football traffic through Red Hollow, and Rosie's diner buzzed with loud conversations, clattering dishes, and the smell of grilled onions drifting through the warm air. Neon lights flickered against the rain-speckled windows while country music played softly from an old jukebox near the entrance. Ethan Carter sat in a booth beside Lily finishing dinner after another 14-hour day at the garage. Across from them sat Claire Whitmore, her sleeves rolled slightly at the wrists while she laughed quietly at one of Lily's stories about school. It was the most relaxed Ethan had ever seen her. No tension in her shoulders. No phone in her hand. Just a woman trying to remember what peace felt like. Then Mrs. Harper said frogs are amphibians. Lily explained dramatically. And Tommy Jenkins said his brother looks like one. Claire nearly choked on her iced tea laughing. Ethan shook his head slowly. "You encourage her too much." "I think she is hilarious," Claire answered. Lily pointed proudly toward Claire. "See? Somebody appreciates me." Several people nearby glanced toward the booth again. The whispers had become impossible to avoid now. A wealthy-looking woman spending every evening beside the struggling mechanic had become the town's favorite rumor. Ethan noticed the stares but kept eating calmly. Claire noticed them too, though hers carried more sadness than irritation. Then the front door opened. 3 businessmen in pressed button-down shirts walked inside, laughing loudly before stopping near the hostess stand. Ethan immediately recognized one of them from the gas station the night he met Claire. Dean Holloway, owner of the largest car dealership in the county and the kind of man who treated respect like something money could purchase. Dean spotted Claire instantly. Then his eyes drifted toward Ethan sitting across from her. A smug smile slowly appeared across his face. "Well," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Looks like small-town mechanics really do know how to get lucky." The diner quieted almost immediately. Claire's expression hardened. Ethan calmly set down his fork without reacting. Dean walked closer with his friends trailing behind him. "No offense, Carter," he continued casually, "but women like her usually do not hang around garages unless they are buying them." One of the men beside him laughed under his breath. Lily lowered her eyes toward the table. Claire looked ready to respond, but Ethan spoke first. Calm. Steady. Evening, Dean. The businessman seemed almost disappointed by Ethan's composure. You fixing luxury cars now? Just helping somebody out. Dean smirked. Sure you are. Silence settled heavily across the diner after that while rain tapped softly against the windows outside. Ethan slowly stood from the booth, not angry, not defensive, simply grounded in the quiet confidence of a man who no longer needed approval from loud people. Respect matters more when nobody is forcing you to give it, he said evenly. Dean chuckled awkwardly. I was joking. Ethan nodded once. That usually says more about the person talking than the person listening. Nobody at the surrounding tables moved. Even the waitress near the counter stopped pouring coffee. Claire stared at Ethan in complete silence while Dean's confident smile faded inch by inch. The strange thing about dignity was how powerful it became once a man stopped trying to prove himself. Dean cleared his throat and forced another laugh before walking toward the back of the diner with his friends. But the energy in the room had already changed. Lily looked up at her father with quiet admiration. Claire looked at him with something deeper. Not attraction alone. Respect. The kind built slowly when someone reveals who they truly are under pressure. Ethan sat back down calmly and reached for his coffee like nothing unusual had happened. Outside, thunder rolled softly beyond the highway while neon reflections shimmered across the wet streets of Red Hollow. And somewhere deep inside Claire Whitmore, a woman surrounded her entire life by powerful men suddenly realized the strongest man she had met in years owned nothing except an old garage, a tired pickup truck, and a heart that refused to become cruel. Saturday morning arrived bright and unusually cool for late summer in Texas. Sunlight spilled across the empty highway while Ethan Carter stood outside the garage sipping black coffee beside the half-finished Mustang. The town still felt quiet except for distant church bells and the occasional rumble of trucks heading toward the interstate. Claire Whitmore stepped out of the small rental house she had quietly extended for another week without telling anyone from the company. For the first time in years, she had nowhere important to rush toward. No cameras, no investors, no carefully rehearsed smiles. Just mornings that smelled like gasoline, coffee, and fresh air drifting through old pine trees. Ethan looked over as she approached. You are here early. Claire smiled softly. I could say the same thing. Garage owners do not really sleep. Corporate executives do not either. Ethan chuckled faintly beneath his breath before handing her the second coffee cup he had already poured without asking. Claire looked surprised. You remembered how I take it. Ethan shrugged lightly. 2 sugars. Small details mattered to people who spent their lives paying attention. Inside the garage, Lily sat on an overturned bucket drawing pictures with colored pencils while old rock music played softly through the dusty speakers overhead. Claire stepped closer to the Mustang and gently ran her fingers across the faded blue paint. My father used to wake me up at 5 in the morning to work on this car, she said quietly. Ethan slid beneath the front axle on a mechanic creeper while loosening bolts near the suspension system. Sounds like he loved it. He loved building things. Her voice softened again after that. Before the company became too big. Ethan listened without interrupting. Good men understood silence better than most people understood words. Claire crouched nearby holding the flashlight steady while Ethan worked beneath the car. Everybody thinks success fixes loneliness, she admitted quietly. But sometimes it just makes it harder to know who actually cares about you. Ethan rolled himself back out slowly and sat up. Grease streaked one side of his jaw while sunlight caught the exhaustion beneath his eyes. Most people only show you who they are after life stops being useful to them. Claire looked at him carefully. Who hurt you? Ethan smiled faintly, though sadness lingered behind it. Life gets everybody eventually. Before Claire could respond, an old green pickup pulled into the lot coughing thick smoke from the exhaust pipe. A nervous teenage boy stepped out looking embarrassed. Mr. Carter? Ethan stood immediately. What happened? My mom needs this truck for work Monday, and I think the radiator blew. Ethan walked over and lifted the hood while steam curled into the warm morning air. Yeah, he muttered calmly. Cracked hose too. The teenager lowered his voice awkwardly. I only got about $80. Ethan glanced toward the worn work boots on the boy's feet and the anxiety all over his face. We will handle it. But I cannot afford. I said we will handle it. The boy looked like he might cry from relief. Claire watched Ethan disappear beneath the hood again without hesitation. No speeches, no lectures about hard work, just immediate kindness offered like breathing. 30 minutes later, Ethan was still repairing the truck while refusing payment beyond the cost of parts. The teenager kept thanking him repeatedly. Claire stood beside the tool bench, quietly watching every second of it. Then she noticed something sitting near the back office wall. A stack of unpaid invoices held together with a rubber band. Medical bills, utility notices, late payment warnings. Ethan Carter was helping half the town survive while barely keeping his own lights on. Claire stared at the papers for a long moment before slowly looking back toward the garage floor where Ethan laughed softly at something Lily had said while tightening the final clamp on the radiator hose. And in that exact moment, surrounded by old tools and struggling people who trusted him more than banks or businessmen, Claire Whitmore realized she had spent years searching for powerful men, only to discover the strongest person she had ever met was the one who quietly carried everyone else without asking for anything in return. Sunday evening settled quietly over Red Hollow while golden lights spilled through the garage windows and stretched long shadows across the concrete floor. Ethan Carter stood beside the Mustang, carefully reinstalling part of the steering assembly, while Claire Whitmore sat nearby, flipping through paperwork spread across the small office desk. Lily had fallen asleep in the back room after spending the afternoon helping organize sockets and wrenches by size. The garage felt peaceful in that rare way life sometimes becomes before everything changes. Claire rubbed her temples tiredly while staring at financial charts glowing from her laptop screen. Numbers, contracts, projections, endless pressure hidden behind polished presentations. Ethan glanced over briefly while tightening another bolt. You should probably stop working for one night. Claire smiled faintly without looking up. That is not really how billion-dollar companies operate. Ethan paused. Billion-dollar. The room suddenly felt quieter after those two words. Claire slowly lifted her eyes from the laptop. She realized immediately what she had accidentally revealed. Outside, wind moved softly through the trees beyond the highway while an 18-wheeler rumbled somewhere far in the distance. Ethan set down his wrench carefully. Whitmore Industries, he said slowly. That is your company. Claire looked down for a moment before nodding once. There was no pride in it, only exhaustion. Ethan leaned lightly against the workbench, processing the realization silently. He had heard of Whitmore Industries his entire life. Factories, manufacturing plants, aerospace contracts, thousands of employees across the country. The company was practically American royalty in the business world. Claire closed the laptop gently. I was not hiding it to manipulate you. Ethan gave a small nod. I know. I just wanted somebody to talk to without feeling like a headline. Ethan looked around the garage quietly after that. The stained floors, the old tools, the unpaid bills sitting beside the coffee machine. Suddenly the distance between their worlds felt enormous. Claire noticed it instantly. Ethan, you own one of the biggest companies in the country. He said it calmly, not bitterly. That somehow made it hurt more. Claire stepped closer slowly. And you are still the same man who stopped in the rain to help a stranger. Ethan smiled faintly, but it did not fully reach his eyes. People like me do not usually end up in stories with people like you. Claire looked at him carefully. Who decided that? Before Ethan could answer, a sharp alert sound echoed from Claire's laptop. She frowned and reopened the screen quickly. A series of engineering reports filled the monitor beside flashing warning symbols connected to one of Whitmore Industries' manufacturing plants in Ohio. Claire's expression tightened immediately. What is it? Ethan asked. One of our production lines keeps overheating during high-volume output. She shook her head in frustration. The engineers have been trying to solve it for months. Ethan walked over quietly, more out of instinct than curiosity. The schematic diagrams reflected across his face while he studied the design in silence. Claire watched him carefully. It is probably boring mechanic stuff to you, she muttered tiredly. Ethan did not answer right away. His eyes narrowed slightly at the screen. Then he pointed toward a pressure regulation component near the center of the diagram. That cooling valve placement is wrong. Claire blinked. Excuse me. Ethan leaned closer toward the screen. At high temperatures, pressure would spike faster than the release cycle can compensate. That line is choking airflow. Claire stared at him. Our engineers never mentioned that. Ethan shrugged lightly. Because engineers design things in offices. He pointed again toward the schematic. Mechanics see what actually breaks after people use it. Silence filled the garage after that. Claire slowly looked from the laptop back toward Ethan, standing beneath dusty fluorescent lights in a faded work shirt stained with grease. He had noticed in 30 seconds what teams of corporate specialists had apparently missed for months. Outside, thunder rolled softly beyond the dark Texas sky while the old garage hummed quietly around them. And in that exact moment, Claire Whitmore realized the struggling single father everyone underestimated might quietly be one of the smartest men she had ever met. Rain returned to Red Hollow the following night, falling steadily against the garage roof while Ethan Carter sat alone at the small office desk long after Lily had gone to sleep. A single lamp illuminated stacks of invoices, repair manuals, and the engineering schematics Claire Whitmore accidentally left open on her laptop before stepping outside to take a call. The soft hum of fluorescent lights mixed with distant thunder while Ethan stared quietly at the diagrams on the screen. He should have walked away from it. Men like him were not supposed to involve themselves in billion-dollar corporate problems. But something about the design kept bothering him. Ethan leaned closer toward the monitor, studying airflow patterns and thermal pressure outputs the same way musicians study sheet music. Slowly, his expression tightened. "That is not the valve," he muttered softly to himself. He grabbed a grease pencil and started sketching across an old cardboard box beside the desk. Pressure ratios, heat distribution paths, mechanical stress points. None of it looked fancy, but every line came from years of fixing machines that failed in real life instead of clean laboratories. Outside the office window, Claire stood beneath the awning speaking sharply into her phone while rain blew sideways across the parking lot. "I already told the board I am not approving the merger until the overheating issue is resolved," she said coldly. Silence followed from the other end of the line before her jaw tightened again. "No, Richard. I do not care what the shareholders want." Ethan could hear exhaustion underneath every word. The kind, powerful people learn to hide in public. Claire finally ended the call and stepped back inside, brushing rainwater from her coat. She noticed the sketches immediately spread across the desk. "You are still looking at it?" Ethan rubbed his eyes tiredly. "Your engineers are solving the wrong problem." Claire walked closer slowly. "What do you mean?" Ethan pointed toward the blueprint. "The cooling system is not failing because of pressure." He tapped another section of the design. "It is failing because somebody shortened the exhaust cycle to increase production speed." Claire stared at him. "That was changed 8 months ago during expansion." Ethan nodded once. "Whoever approved it traded long-term stability for short-term output." He leaned back in the chair. "That line will eventually overheat, no matter how many cooling upgrades they install." The garage suddenly felt completely silent except for rain striking the windows. Claire slowly lowered herself into the chair across from him. "Our lead engineering team has spent 6 months trying to diagnose this." Ethan gave a faint shrug. "You cannot force machines to move faster than they were designed to breathe." Claire looked down at the rough sketches spread across the desk. Nothing about Ethan Carter fit the image of a corporate consultant or systems engineer. Yet every instinct inside her told her he was right. "How do you even know this stuff?" she asked quietly. Ethan stared toward the dark garage floor for a moment before answering. "My dad used to rebuild industrial engines for factories before he opened this place." His voice softened slightly with memory. "I spent half my childhood inside machine shops." Claire studied him carefully beneath the dim office light. "You could have done a lot more than run a small-town garage." Ethan smiled faintly, though sadness lingered behind it. Life had other plans. The words carried more weight than he intended. Claire noticed it. Immediately. So much hidden pain lived inside quiet people. Before she could respond, her phone buzzed again with another incoming call from New York. Claire looked at the screen but did not answer this time. Instead, she reached over slowly and closed the laptop. "You know what the strangest part is?" she said softly. Ethan looked up. Claire smiled sadly. "The smartest conversation I have had in years is happening inside a garage with rain leaking through the ceiling." Ethan glanced upward as another drop hit the floor beside the desk. "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I keep meaning to fix that." And for the first time in a very long time, Claire Whitmore laughed without forcing it at all. Tuesday evening arrived with heavy storm clouds hanging above downtown Dallas while Ethan Carter adjusted the sleeves of the only blazer he owned inside the back seat of Claire Whitmore's black sedan. City lights reflected across rain-covered streets outside as traffic crawled between glass towers and luxury hotels. Ethan looked deeply uncomfortable. Not scared, just out of place. Claire sat beside him wearing a dark navy dress and pearl earrings that caught the soft interior light every time she turned her head. Elegant, calm, but nervous in a way Ethan had never seen before. "You still have time to turn around," he muttered quietly while staring out the window. Claire smiled faintly. "You say that every 10 minutes. Because this is not my world. Maybe that is exactly why I wanted you here." Ethan looked down at his rough hands resting against his knees. No matter how clean they were, years of engine grease had permanently stained the lines in his skin. Men in rooms like this usually had polished watches and expensive degrees. Ethan had toolboxes and overdue bills. The car finally pulled beneath the entrance canopy of the Whitmore Grand Hotel, where photographers and executives moved beneath glowing chandeliers and marble pillars. A large banner stretched above the entrance reading Whitmore Industries' Future Innovation Gala. Ethan stepped out slowly beside Claire while rain tapped softly against the pavement around them. The moment people recognized Claire, conversations shifted instantly. Executives straightened their posture. Investors hurried forward. Smiles appeared like reflexes. Ethan noticed it all immediately. "You were not kidding about the billionaire thing," he murmured under his breath. Claire almost laughed despite the tension. "Stay close to me." Inside, the ballroom shimmered with gold lights, crystal glasses, and quiet orchestral music drifting through the massive room. Waiters moved between groups carrying trays of champagne, while giant digital screens displayed Whitmore Industries projects and stock growth numbers. Ethan looked around carefully, feeling more invisible with every step. Then he heard a familiar voice. "Well, I will be damned." Dean Holloway stood near the bar in a tailored black suit, holding a whiskey glass while two investors laughed beside him. His eyes moved slowly from Claire to Ethan before amusement spread across his face. The mechanic made it to the big leagues. Ethan remained calm. Claire's expression hardened immediately. Dean stepped closer with the same smug confidence Ethan remembered from the diner. "Careful around these people, Carter," he said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "Some silverware in this room costs more than your garage." A few uncomfortable chuckles spread through the crowd nearby. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly, not ashamed, simply exhausted by men who measured worth through money. Claire watched him carefully, waiting for anger. But Ethan only adjusted his cuffs quietly. "Probably true," he answered calmly. Dean smirked wider. "So what exactly are you doing here tonight?" Silence settled softly around them while glasses clinked somewhere across the ballroom. Ethan glanced toward Claire before answering. "She invited me." Dean laughed openly now. "That is generous." The insult lingered in the air like smoke. Then Claire slowly stepped beside Ethan until they stood shoulder to shoulder beneath the ballroom lights. Her voice stayed calm, precise. "Do you know what the problem with powerful men is, Dean?" The businessman blinked slightly. Claire looked directly at him. "Most of them think intelligence only exists in people wearing expensive suits." The room grew quieter. Even nearby conversations began fading away. Claire continued without raising her voice. "The smartest man in this building tonight arrived with grease on his hands." Nobody laughed after that. Dean's confident smile weakened instantly, while executives nearby exchanged confused looks. Ethan turned toward Claire completely stunned by what she had just said. But Claire never looked away from Dean Holloway. Because after years surrounded by arrogant men who spoke endlessly about power, she had finally met a good man who never once needed to announce his worth at all. The ballroom remained silent long after Claire Whitmore finished speaking. Crystal chandeliers glowed above hundreds of wealthy guests while soft orchestra music continued somewhere in the background, suddenly sounding distant and unimportant. Dean Holloway stood frozen beside the bar, gripping his whiskey glass too tightly, his confident smile completely gone now. Ethan Carter shifted uncomfortably beneath the attention gathering around him from every corner of the room. He looked like a man who would rather rebuild an engine in silence than stand beneath a spotlight. Claire noticed immediately. That was the difference between men like Ethan and every executive in the building. He never chased recognition. "Claire," one board member finally said carefully from near the stage. "What exactly do you mean by that statement?" Claire slowly turned toward the crowd. Her expression stayed calm, but there was emotion beneath it now. real emotion. 3 nights ago, she began quietly. Whitmore Industries was preparing to approve a manufacturing expansion that would have caused catastrophic system failures within 6 months. Several executives exchanged nervous glances immediately. Claire continued walking slowly toward the large digital presentation screen near the stage. Our engineering teams missed the flaw. Our consultants missed the flaw. Our analysts missed the flaw. Ethan lowered his eyes slightly, already uncomfortable with where this conversation was heading. Claire pressed a button on the presentation remote. The engineering schematics appeared across the massive screen behind her. But a mechanic from a small Texas town found the problem in less than an hour. Silence. Complete silence. You could hear glasses settling softly onto tables around the ballroom. Claire pointed toward the highlighted system design on the screen. The overheating issue was not caused by pressure instability like our report suggested. Her voice sharpened slightly now. It was caused by an executive-approved modification that increased production speed beyond safe operational airflow. Murmurs spread instantly through the crowd. Several engineers sitting near the front looked visibly stunned while reviewing the diagrams themselves. Claire turned toward Ethan, standing quietly near the back of the room. He saw what everybody else ignored because he understands machines the way good doctors understand people. Ethan shook his head faintly. "Claire, you do not need to." "Yes," she interrupted softly. "I do." The room fell silent again. Claire looked around slowly at the wealthy investors, executives, and businessmen who spent years measuring intelligence through resumes and tailored suits. "Do you know how much money this company would have lost if the system failed nationwide?" Nobody answered. Claire's eyes drifted back toward Ethan. "About $2.4 billion. A sharp silence swept across the ballroom like a wave. Even Dean Holloway looked completely speechless now. Ethan stared at the floor briefly, almost embarrassed by the attention. That somehow made the moment even more powerful. Because humility always becomes louder inside rooms full of ego. One senior engineer stood carefully from his table. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly, "we reviewed the mechanics notes an hour ago with our production teams." He paused before continuing. "He is right." More silence. No whispers now. No smirks. No quiet jokes about small-town garages. Just stunned stillness beneath crystal lights and polished marble floors. Claire walked slowly back toward Ethan until they stood facing each other near the center of the ballroom. "You saved this company," she said quietly enough that only nearby guests could hear. Ethan gave a faint shake of his head. "I just noticed a mistake." Claire smiled sadly. "No. You noticed the truth while everybody else was too busy protecting their pride." Somewhere near the back of the room, applause finally started. Then another table joined. Then another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom rose into a standing ovation echoing against the high ceilings of the Whitmore Grand Hotel. But Ethan Carter did not smile proudly or raise his head like a hero in a movie. He simply stood there quietly in his worn blazer with grease still faintly visible beneath his fingernails, looking completely overwhelmed by a level of respect he never expected to receive. And in the middle of all that applause, the loudest sound in the room was the silence from every person who had once mistaken kindness for weakness. 3 months later, the first light of autumn spread softly across Red Hollow while cold morning air drifted through the open garage doors of Carter Auto Repair. The old building looked different now. Fresh paint covered the exterior walls. The leaking roof had finally been repaired. New hydraulic lifts stood beside the original workbenches Ethan Carter refused to replace because they still carried the marks and memories of his father's hands. But despite every upgrade, the garage still smelled the same. Motor oil, coffee, dust, honest work. Ethan stood beneath the hood of the fully restored Mustang, wearing the same faded brown work jacket he had owned for years. Music played quietly from the radio while sunlight reflected across polished chrome and deep blue paint restored carefully piece by piece over countless evenings. Outside, trucks rolled slowly along Route 8 as the small town woke up around him. "Dad," Lily called excitedly from the office doorway. "She is here." Ethan glanced up just as Claire Whitmore stepped from her car, carrying 2 coffee cups, while the autumn wind moved softly through her hair. No security team. No black SUVs. Just Claire. She smiled the second she saw him standing beside the Mustang. "You are already working." Ethan accepted the coffee from her with a faint grin. Machines do not fix themselves. That sounds exactly like something you would say. Lily ran outside carrying a stack of school papers. I got another A in science, she announced proudly. Claire crouched beside her immediately. I knew you would. Ethan watched them quietly while steam drifted from the coffee cups into the cool Texas morning air. Life still was not perfect. Bills still existed. Work still exhausted him. But the heaviness inside the house felt different now. Lighter somehow. Across town, people still talked about the gala night when Whitmore Industries publicly credited a small-town mechanic with saving the company from disaster. Reporters had called. Investors had offered consulting contracts. One television network even tried convincing Ethan to appear on a business segment. He declined every single offer. I already got a job, he told them simply. Claire leaned against the Mustang while watching Ethan finish tightening the final chrome trim piece near the hood. You know, most people would have left town by now after everything that happened. Ethan wiped his hands slowly with a rag. And go where? New York. Chicago. Anywhere. Ethan looked around the garage quietly. Toward Lily laughing beside the office. Toward the old photographs hanging on the walls. Toward the town that once underestimated him but now greeted him differently every morning. Some things are worth more than money, he answered calmly. Claire smiled softly because deep down she had already known that was exactly what he would say. The Mustang engine finally roared to life with a deep, smooth rumble filling the garage. Lily clapped excitedly while Ethan adjusted the idle carefully beneath the warm sunlight pouring through the open doors. Claire stood there watching him for a long moment without speaking. Not because she was admiring the car, but because she was admiring the man who rebuilt things patiently instead of replacing them the second they became damaged. Men like Ethan Carter were rare now. Quiet men. Loyal men. Men who carried dignity without demanding attention for it. A black pickup slowed outside the garage as Dean Holloway drove past on Route 8. He glanced toward Ethan through the window before quickly looking away again. No smirk this time. No jokes. Just silence. The kind silence that only arrives after truth humbles pride. Ethan noticed the truck pass, but said nothing. He simply leaned against the Mustang beside Claire, while morning sunlight warmed the concrete floor around them. Somewhere nearby, church bells rang softly through the town. Lily laughed in the background while turning circles beneath falling autumn leaves. And in the middle of that peaceful little garage beside an old Texas highway, a struggling single father finally understood something life had spent years trying to teach him. A good man does not become valuable because powerful people finally notice him. His value was already there the entire time. The world simply needed to slow down long enough to see it.